So what did we do last time? December 2021. So we continue with the financial distress. So we have done an introduction on that item. So there's a question you are to deal with, which was meant to be December 2021. It was question number 3, part C. So we now go to the question for November. So the question we shall deal with should be, so the December, but not November, December 2021. So December 2021. So the question is December 2021. Question number 3, part C. Question number 3, part C. So that question 3, part C, it says that the following data relate to Cabana Limited, a company that operates in the manufacturing sector. A company that operates in the manufacturing sector for the year ended 31st December 2020. So you have been given the figure for the sales. You are given the value for the sales. So the question had given you the value for the sales. Then also total assets, total liabilities, retained earnings, also net working capital, earnings before interest and tax, market value of equity. You are also given the book value of the total liabilities. The company is currently paying interest on the long-term debt instrument amounting to 905,000 per year. And the company's total liability is considered to be in the ratio of 2:5 between the current and non-current components. So required, using the Springkett model, assess the financial health of the company. So the Springkett model takes the following form. So they have given you a formula which we shall be using, where A is the net working capital divided by the total assets. B is supposed to be operating profit. So operating profit is the same as earnings before interest and tax. Operating profit is the same as earnings before interest and the tax. Then C, net profit before the tax divided by the current liabilities. D is supposed to be sales divided by the total assets. So we start off by calculating those ratios. Once we have calculated the ratios, now we combine them in the model and see what will be the value for it. So we start with A. We start by computing A. So A is supposed to be net working capital divided by the total assets. So it is simply the net working capital divided by the total assets. So to get that figure, we go back to the income statement given to you. So they have already given the net working capital, which is a negative value. There is negative 1777, which is negative because it is in brackets. You divide by the total assets. So total assets are given as 49. It is 49,579. So we just leave it like that. You don't divide because we shall combine them in the model directly. That's now meant to be A. When it comes to B, B is supposed to be operating profit divided by the total assets. Operating profit is the same as earnings before interest and tax. We also divide by the total assets. So operating profit or earnings before interest and tax, you can see a figure of 2605. You also divide by 49 It is 49,579. So that one has also been provided. Then now we need to go to C. We come up with C. So C is supposed to be net profit before the tax. The net profit before the tax. Net profit is the net profit before the tax. Is the net profit before the tax. You divide by the current liabilities. Divide by the current liabilities. So we need to do some workings in order to get the net profit before the tax. Because the question had given you earnings before interest and tax. So we do a working whereby earnings before interest and tax was given. Earnings before interest and tax was given as 26,005. So first you less interest. We minus interest in order to get the net profit or earnings before the tax. So interest was given in the question. Interest was given in the question where they have given us that the company is currently paying interest on the long-term debt instrument amounting to how much? 905. We subtract 905 from there to get the earnings before the tax. So to come up with what is supposed to be the earnings before the tax. 1,700. So after getting this figure, we do another working. We do another working in order to get the current liability. So we also need to calculate the current liability. Current liability was not given, but they gave you some information which can assist you to get that figure. After the interest, they continued to say that the company's total liability constitutes in the ratio of 2:5 between current and non-current. So it is 2:5. So 2:5. So the total should be what? It should be 7. So it is 2:5. So current liability will be 2/7. Because that's now the ratio. We have said that the current liabilities to non-current component. So the one which represents 2 is for the current liabilities. So the question had given you the total liabilities. The question had given the total liabilities. So total liabilities, you can see in the income statement, total liability is 50. It is 5044. So in case it has some decimal point, we shall use it directly. Don't divide in case it has so many decimal points. I hope it has some decimal points. Yeah, so what you do, simply come here and calculate it directly. Simply come at that point, then you compute it directly. So net profit before tax is the same as our earnings before the tax, which we got a figure of 17. So now we divide by the current liability. So current liability, you can work it directly, which is 2/7 multiplied by 1544, and see how it will be. But you just leave it like that because we shall apply them directly in the model. When you compute this, give me which figure. So, sorry. It is 1441. Exactly 1441. 142. So you can round off because there are 3 zeros at the top. So I round off to 3. So maybe we can just change this one to be 1441.143. So that now should be our value of C. That should be our value for C. So after getting the value for C, we also compute the value for D. We shall also be required to calculate the value for D. We should also be able to compute the value for D. So D, when you check through the information, so D is supposed to be, D is meant to be the sales divided by the total assets. Sales divided by the total assets. So sales were meant to be 25. They were meant to be 25, 678. 678. Total assets, we know it is 49, 579, like that. So once we have calculated those figures, we can now get our spring rate. That is Z. So Z will now be equal to, so the ratio is already given, so 1.03 multiplied by A. So A is meant to be negative 1777 divided by 49, 579, like that. Then we also add 3.07 multiplied by B. So B is meant to be 2605 divided by 49, 579, like that. The next one is supposed to be 0.66. So this one we multiply by 1700 divided by 1441.43. Finally, the last one is meant to be 0.4 also multiplied by, that should be 25, 678 divided by 49, 579, like that. So that now should be able to give us the spring rate. So you get that ratio and see it is going to give us which value. So once you compute, you can give me the value. Once you have calculated, you can give me the value. So it is giving us around which field? 7? 1 point? 1.11. Then when you check in the notes I'd given you the benchmark in the handout. When you check on the handout, there was a benchmark we had set. It is 0.8 was. 862. Yeah, so the benchmark is 0.862. But what we have calculated is 1.11. So when you check through the notes, if that particular score is 0.862, it indicates that the firm, if it is more than 0.862, it shows that the farm will be successful. But if it is less, it means to be failed. So we can comment that, since the index is greater than 0.862, the index is greater than 0.862, then it implies that the company will be successful. Then it implies that the company will be successful. Then it implies that the company will be successful. So that's now the comment you are meant to give about the Spring-Cade model. So we got the model number 2. That was number 1 as per what we are writing in the book. So we got the model number 2. After that, we got to the model number 2. After that, we shall be required to go to the model number 2. Go to the model number 2. We go to the model number 2. So model number 2 is supposed to be Altman Zscore model. So number 2 should be Altman Zscore model. So that one is not in the handout. We are writing it. Yeah, the Altman Zscore model, I did not include it there so that we see the concept before we do some questions on it. So we got the model number 2, which is Altman Zscore model. The Altman Zscore model. So it is also a measure or an indicator whether the company will be successful or fail. So under that, we can write that this model combines various ratios. This model combines various ratios. It combines various ratios in order to determine. It combines various ratios in order to determine whether the company is a going concern. In order to determine whether the company is a going concern. In order to determine whether the company is a going concern. And it is normally expressed as follows. Whether the company is a going concern, and it is normally expressed as follows. And it is normally expressed as follows. So Z-score, Z will be equal to 1.2 x1 plus 1.4 x2 plus 3.3 x3 plus 0.6 x4 also plus 1.0 x5. So we'll be explaining each one of them. We shall be able to explain each one of them on the basis of that information provided. On the basis of that information provided. So where x1 is equal to, so x1 will be equal to the net working capital, it is simply the net working capital, net working capital, we divide by the total assets. So X1 is meant to be net working capital, we divide by the total assets. We divide by the total assets. Then X2 is meant to be retained earnings. X2 is equal to the retained earnings divided by the total assets. X2 is the retained earnings divided by the total assets. The retained earnings divided by the total assets. Then X3 will be earnings before interest and tax, also divided by the total assets. Earnings before interest and tax, also divided by the total asset. Then remember, earnings before interest and tax is the same as the operating profits. Earnings before interest and tax is the same as the operating profits. Then X4 is meant to be market value of the equity shares. Market value of equity shares. Market value of equity shares. Market value of the equity shares. We divide by book value of debt. The book value of the debt and preference shares. So X4 is meant to be market value of equity shares divided by book value of the debts and preference shares. The book value of the debts and the preference shares. Then X5 is meant to be sales divided by the total assets. X5 is meant to be the sales divided by the total assets. So we go to the sitting of November. So before we do that, maybe we can add there another paragraph, sorry. We can add there another paragraph by noting that Altman concluded as follows. 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 So the first dash is that if. So the first dash if the Z-score, if the Z-score is greater than 2.7. If the Z-score is greater than 2.7, then it indicates that the company will be successful. Then it indicates that the company will be successful. If the Z-score is greater than 2.7, then it indicates that the company will be successful. Also, if the Z-score is less than 1.8, if it is less than 1.8, then it indicates that the company will fail. Then it indicates that the company will fail. Then it indicates that the company will fail. Then also, if the Z-score is between 1.8 and 2.7. If the Z-score is between 1.8 and 2.7, then it indicates that there is 50% chance. Then it indicates that So if the Z-score is between 1.8 and 2.7, then it indicates that there is 50% chance of success and a 50% chance of failure. Then there is 60% chance of success and a 50% chance of failure and a 50% chance of failure. So from that analysis, let us check the question for November 2020. November 2020, question 1, part B. We can check November 2020, question number 1, part B. 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 So question 1, part B for November 2020, they were able to give us information that Professor Edward Altman's model for prediction of bankruptcy is given as follows. So Z-score is equal to 1.2x1 plus 1.4x2 plus 3.3x3 plus 0.64x4. Then this time, mine, I rounded it off to 1.0, but then they have given me 0.999x5. So we use what they have given you normally when it comes to that scenario. So they have also identified what is x1, x2, x3, x4, and x5. Then they continued to say that given below are summarized financial statements of Alpha Limited for the year ended 31st December 2019. For the year ended 31st December 2019. So income statement for the year ended 31st December 2019 is provided. You can see what is given there. Then when you go down there, they are saying that in this model, a Z-score of 2.7 or more indicates no signs of failure, but a Z-score of 1.8 or less, 1.8 or less indicates that there will be, are signs of failure. So the firm ordinary share are currently trading at 15 each. So required, they wanted you to calculate the Z-score for the Alpha Limited. Then also you comment whether it will be successful or it will fail. So we start by calculating the ratios. We need to get x1, x2, x3, x4, and x5. Then finally you apply in the model directly. Then finally you apply in the model directly. So these questions, I normally prefer them to be structured. You just fill, because they have given you the formula. They have also given you what x1, x2 is. So you simply go to the income statement, then you express them. So we start with the x1. We start by coming up with x1. So x1 is simply, it is simply the working capital. It is simply the working capital. We divide by the total assets. We divide by the total assets. So when you go to that income statement, you are given details about that. Not income, but the statement of the financial position. In the statement of the financial position, are you able to see what they have given you as? So the first you check in the income statement. So when you check up there in the statement of the financial position, so working capital is the same as current assets minus the current liabilities. Then you divide by the total assets. So working capital is the same as the current assets minus the current liabilities. You divide by the total assets. So when you check in the question, current assets were given. Are you able to see the current assets? So they have given you 100 millions. There are 3 zeros at the top. Then you subtract current liabilities. When you check down there, they gave you total current liabilities, which is how much? They have given you 20 millions. We are supposed to divide by the total assets. We are supposed to divide by the total assets. So total assets, they have given us how much? 400. So finally, that figure is going to be 80 millions. 80 millions, we divide by 400 millions. 80 millions, divide by 400 millions. So that is now meant to be our X1. We also go to X2. We also get what is supposed to be X2. So X2, from what you can see in the information, it is the retained earnings divided by the total assets. Retained earnings divided by the total assets. So the retained earnings, you take the one in the balance sheet or statement of financial position. Don't take the one in the income statement. Income statement is just for that year alone. But what we want is for the company. So retained earnings, you go to the balance sheet or statement of the financial position. In that balance sheet, under financed by, are you able to see the retained profits? They have given us 100 and what? So it is 120 millions. Total assets will still remain 400 millions like that. We go to X2, sorry, 3. We go to X3. So X3 is supposed to be operating profits divided by the total assets. So operating profit is the same as the earnings before interest and tax. Earnings before interest and tax is given in the income statement. Are you able to see the operating profits? Operating profit is the same as the earnings before interest and tax. How much is that figure? It gave us 40 millions. Yeah, so it is 40 millions. You also divide by the total assets, which is supposed to be. So we are saying that it is earnings before interest and tax divided by the total assets. So it is 40 millions. Also divide by 400 millions. That is now meant to be our X3. We go to X4. So X4 is supposed to be, so our X4 should be market value of equity shares. Market value of the equity shares. Market value of the equity shares. We divide by the book value of the debts and preference shares. And the preference shares. So to get market value of the equity shares, when you want to calculate market value of equity shares, you simply take the number of the ordinary shares multiplied by the current market price per share. So in the question, are you able to see somewhere where they've given you ordinary share capital? The figure is 100 millions divided by the bar value. In brackets, the bar value for each ordinary share is how much? 10. Then that will give you the number of the ordinary shares. When you go to the end of the question before required, the end of the question before required, the firm's ordinary shares are currently trading at how much each? So multiplied by 15, that should be able to give you market value of equity. You simply get the number of the ordinary shares, multiply the current market price per share. Then you divide by book value of debts and the preference shares. So when you check down there, are you able to see the preference share capital is how much? Preference share capital is 40 million, isn't it? Then 10% debenture capital is 80 million. So we add them together. So what is the book value of equity? Inakuja 150 millions. Then hii ingine ni 120. So this other one will be 120 millions. 120. So that's now X4. Then X5. Then X5. When it comes to X5, they have said that X5 is supposed to be the sales divided by the total assets. Sales divided by total assets. So the figure for the sales is 400 million. Total assets is also 400 million. So now from there, let us now calculate the Z-score. You go straight to the model. Now you have all the variables. So now to get our Z-score, it will be that 1.2 multiplied by X1. So X1, it is 80 millions divided by 400 millions. Then you add. The next one is 1.4 multiplied by X2. So X2 is 120 millions. Also divided by 400. The next one is supposed to be 3.3 X3. So this one will be 40 millions divided by 400 millions. The next one is supposed to be 0.6. So it is 0.6. We multiplied by X4. So X4 is 150 millions, also divided by 120 millions. Then we also add. So the last part, they gave us 0.99. So you take 0.99. We multiplied by X5, it is 400 million. So we use their model. I had given you a model whereby the last one I rounded it off to 1. So now you combine them on your calculator. Combine them on your calculator now to get that Z-score. So combine those figures in your calculator, then get the value, because your calculator has the capacity to get those figures. So it has given us which value? I can see 2.739. Yeah, so that means that you comment Roman letter 2. Roman letter 2, we comment that since the Z-score is greater than 2.7, so Roman letter 2, we comment that since the Z-score is greater than 2.7, then it indicates the company will be successful. Since the Z-score is greater than 2.7, then it indicates that the company will be successful. Then it indicates that the company will be successful. So there is one more question in relation to that. I want you to go to the sitting of December 2014, question number 3, part A. December 2014, question number 3, part A. We can check the question for December 2014, question number 3, part A. We check December 2014, question number 3, part A. So go to December 2014, question number 3, part A. So we check December 2014, question number 3, part A. December 2014, question number 3, part A. So let us go through the question. The question reads that the following are the summarized financial statements of Shinda Products Limited, which is facing financial difficulties. So income statement for the year ended 31st December 2013. So the question gave you the turnover. Also, they gave you earnings before interest and tax. They have also given us interest, profit before the tax. Then you less the tax. Then profit after the tax, dividends, also the retained earnings. So statement of the financial position as at 31st December 2013 is given. They gave you assets. We have non-current assets, land and the buildings, then plant and the machinery and the others. They also gave you the current assets, where there is inventory, trade, receivables, book balances, total assets, equity and liabilities, ordinary share capital, retained earnings. They also gave you current liabilities, where we have the trade payables, taxation, also dividends. Also long-term liabilities, where there is the bank loan, 10% debentures, total equity and liabilities. So corporate tax rate is 30%. Then the company shares are currently trading at 30 per share at the securities exchange. The cost of capital is 12%. Interest rate on the bank loan is 12%. The Altman model for predicting the corporate failure is as follows. So this time they have used you can see the last one. It is 1.0, but this question it was 0.99. So that question looks like 1 or 2 pages, but the information required is very little from the question. We know the model has been specified. X1 is net working capital divided by the total assets, also retained. And so we go direct to those items. We start by getting the value for X1. So when you go through the question to get X1, you simply come direct at this point to see what should be the value for X1. So X1 is the net working capital divided by the total assets. So net working capital, it is the current assets minus the current liabilities. So what are we given as the current assets? Current assets in the question is given as 300 and what? Current assets. Now 303 for the inventory, 63 for the trade receivable, bank of 9. So it is 300 and you can see the 375 millions. That is meant to be our current assets. Current liabilities, you see current liabilities, trade payables, taxation, and the dividend. The total is 420. So you minus 420 millions. We are supposed to divide by the total assets. So total assets were given. Total assets were given as how much? So it is given as 1266. Given us. So we remove medium, there are only 3 zeros at the top. So you can just work on the basis of that. So what is the difference? Will be negative what? It's negative 45. Negative 45 divided by 1266. That is now x1. That is meant to be our x1. So we also calculate our x2. So for x2 is supposed to be the retained earnings divided by the total assets. So retained earnings, remember we said, we take the one in the statement of the financial position. That retained earnings is 200 and what? It's 222. We also divide by the total assets, which is 1266. Then we go to x3. X3 is simply meant to be earnings before interest and tax. So earnings before interest and tax is given. Earnings before interest and tax. In the income statement, that figure is how much? 84 millions. It's given as 84 million. 84. Then total assets is 1266. The next item is X4. So X4 is supposed to be market value of equity shares. You divide by the book value of the debts and preferred shares. The book value of the debts and the preferred shares. So book value of equity and preferred shares. First, you get the number of the ordinary shares. To get the number of the ordinary shares, you take 147, then you divide by, you are supposed to divide by, the bar value per share is how much? Yeah, so they were able to give you 25. Then you go to the note number 2. They gave you, the shares are currently trading at how much in the note number 2? 30 shillings like that. Then we divide by the book value of the debt. So debts are the long-term liabilities. Bank loan is 183. Bank loan is 183. Then debentures is 294. So this question had no preferred shares. So what should be the market value of the equity shares? Sorry? 176.4. Then this total is which value? Sorry? 477. So we go to X5. We go to X5. We get the value of X5. Get the value of X5. We get the value of X5. So when it comes to X5, it is the sales. We divide by the total assets. So sales is the same as the turnover. Sales will be the same as the turnover. It is 1209. it is 1209. We also divide by the total assets. So total assets, remember they were how much? 1266. So now from there, we compute our Z-score. We calculate our Z-score. So we use the formula they have given us. We use the formula they were able to give you. So it is 1.2 multiplied by x1, it is -45, divided by 1266. Like that. Then we also add 1.4 multiplied by, it is 222 divided by 1266. The next one is meant to be 3.3 multiplied by 84 divided by 1266. The next one is supposed to be 0.6 multiplied by 176.4 divided by 476. And finally, 1 multiplied by, it is 1209, also divided by 1266. So get the Z-score from that point, so that we also comment about it. So that we also comment about that particular Z-score. So this one is giving us which here. Online you are getting which value? Anyone who has computed online. Does it 2.076. Sorry? 1.6. Online you are getting which here? Online, someone has given me 1.6. The other one is 1.599. So you can round it off to 2 decimal places. Yeah, we can just use 1.6. We can just use 1.6. Remember, if you round them off separately, it will change. That's why we insist we have them directly like that. So when you round off, you have a figure of 1.6. When you round it off, we shall have a value of 1.6. So the question wanted you to calculate and also comment on the results. So we can now comment. We can now comment. So the comment is that the company will fail. The company will fail since the Z-score is less than 1.8. The company will fail since the Z-score is less than 1.8. Since the Z-score is less than 1.8. So that is now what was meant to be our part A, where you are to compute the Z-score. So you go to part B. When you go to part B, they wanted you to, other than the Altman model, evaluate 4 other ways of predicting the corporate failure. So I've listed them in your notes. In the handout, I've given you other models of predicting the corporate failure. They are like 8 of them, including the Spring model. It is another more. You are just picking all of them. So you are to pick any 4. When you go to the handout, I gave you other models of predicting the corporate failure. So just pick any of them, then they will be able to work out. So finally, let us have something brief about applications of the Zscore model. We can have something brief about the applications of the Zscore model. Applications of the Zscore model. We can now have the applications of the Zscore model. So number 1 is that to evaluate the performance. Number 1 is to evaluate the performance of the company's managers. Number 1 is to evaluate the performance of the company's managers. To evaluate the performance of the company's managers. Number 2, to predict the corporate failure. Number 2 is that to predict the corporate failure. To predict the corporate failure. Number 3 is that to determine whether the company is a going concern. To determine whether the company is a going concern. To determine whether the company is a going concern. Then the last one, number 4, is that to determine whether the company can enter into the strategic alliance or merger. To determine whether the company can enter into the strategic alliance or mergers. It can enter into the strategic alliance or mergers. So that is now how we could go about the applications. So the rest, you read the handout, because that handout I've simplified some of the information on that. So that now concludes. So that Zscore model, the user time they tested, is it November 2015? Question 1. If you check, they will ask you to give the limitations of the Zscore. Those limitations I've given you in the handout. When you go through that handout, it has limitations of the Zscore model. So it is the last part of the handout. I've given you, it is November or May. Question 1, 2015. So the part A, so those limitations are there. So now from that point, you go through the handout and see what is contained. Let us now have another topic as long-term financing decisions. So now we got the long-term financing decisions. We now go to the long-term financing decisions. Let us now go through the long-term financing decisions. Long-term financing decisions. So there are several of them. There are 4 of them. So we shall be discussing each separately, but they are not that long as expected. So the first one, we write that adjusted net present value. The first long-term financing decision is the adjusted net present value. Adjusted net present value. Adjusted net present value. So I want us to write something brief on that. We can note that the adjusted NPV, is normally applicable under the following circumstance. The adjusted NPV is normally applicable under the following circumstances. So let us outline them. Number 1, or A, is that if the financing of the new project, is different from the company's existing capital structure. If the financing of the new project is different from the company's existing capital structure. If the financing of the new project is different from the company's existing capital structure. i.e., the new project may be financed. The new project may be financed using 80% debt. The new project may be financed using 80% debt, 80% debt, and 20% equity. 80% debt and 20% equity, and 20% equity. While the company is financed, using 40% debt and 60% equity, while the company is financed using 40% debt and 60% equity, and 60% equity. That's now the first reason why we need to use the adjusted NPV, simply because the financing of the new project is different from the company's existing capital structure. Number two is that where the project is partly financed, using the debt, where the government has given the subsidy, Then we continue on the same by noting that hence the interest rate will be lower than the market interest rate. Hence the interest rate will be lower than the market interest rate. The interest rate will be lower than the market interest rate. The interest rate will be lower than the market interest rate. That is now meant to be B. Then C or 3 is that where there are different types of the cash flows, generated by the project, which are discounted using different discounting rate, Then number 4 is that where there are complex tax structures, associated with the project, i.e., the project may be exempted from paying tax for some time. Then the last one, number 5, is that where capital allowances and the tax benefit, arising from the project, is only provided for some period, So those are the circumstances under which adjusted NPV is applicable. So there was a question on that item in the sitting of April 2022. When you check April 2022, question number 1, part A, Roman letter 2. When you check April 2022, question 1, part A, Roman letter 2. When you check April 2022, April 2022, when you check through that question 1, part A, Roman letter 2. So the Roman letter 2, they were asking you to propose 3 circumstances under which adjusted present value may be preferred to the net present value approach as a method of evaluating the capital what? Investment project. So I've given you 5 of them. You are only meant to pick 3. So that part A of April 2022, question 1, part A, Roman letter 2. So those are the circumstances under which adjusted NPV will be applied instead of the normal NPV. So you go through them and see the impact on that question. So apart from that, now we add there a new paragraph by summarizing that under these conditions, comma, adjusted NPV is computed under these conditions, comma, adjusted NPV is computed by adopting the following steps. Adjusted NPV is computed by adopting the following steps. Adjusted NPV is computed by adopting the following steps. It is computed by adopting the following steps. So we start off with the step number 1. We start off with the step number 1. So step 1, we can write that. Step number 1, we write that determine. So our step number 1 is that determine best case NPV. Determine the best case NPV. So step number 1 is that determine the best case NPV. So when it comes to that step number 1, when it comes to the step number 1 to determine the best case NPV, we write that this is the NPV of the project. This is the NPV of the project, assuming it is all equity financed. It is the NPV of the project, assuming it is all equity financed. Assuming it is all equity financed, i.e., the company is unlevered. I.e., the company is unlevered. I.e., the company is unlevered. Then we continue by writing that if the project is all equity financed, if the project is all equity financed, if the project is all equity financed, then the discounting rate, then the discounting rate will be cost of equity of the unlevered firm. Then the discounting rate will be the cost of equity of the unlevered firm. The discounting rate will be the cost of equity of the unlevered firm, which is obtained using CAPM, which is obtained using CAPM, which is obtained using CAPM as follows. using CAPM as follows. So our discounting rate or cost of capital. So cost of capital will simply be KEU, the cost of equity for the unlevered firm. So it will be given by risk-free rate plus in brackets expected return of the market minus the risk-free rate multiplied by the beta factor of equity for unlevered firm. So the cost of capital is the same as KEU, which will be given by risk-free rate plus in brackets expected return for the market, we minus the risk-free rate, then beta factor of equity for unlevered firm. So also to compute beta factor of equity for unlevered firm, it is given by beta factor of equity for the levered firm, then 1 plus D over E, then 1 minus the tax rate in that manner. So that is now how to compute the beta factor of equity for unlevered firm. So when we are doing the restructuring, we used those formulas. So I want us to, as we go through each step, we use that question for April 2022, question 1, part A. As we go through each step, let us use that question for April 2022, question number 1, part A. So we are using question number 2, part A. So let us go through the question. So the question reads that Treetop Limited is considering an investment project in the tourism industry worth shillings 48 million, which will be diversification from the mainstream activities. So 48 million shillings project cost will be financed as follows. 10 millions will be using the internal funds. Internal funds will be the retained earnings. Then 20 million using the right issue. Right issue is the ordinary share capital. Then 18 million with the long-term loans. Then they also said that the investment is expected to generate pre-tax net cash inflows of approximately shillings 14 million per year for a period of 10 years. The residual value at the end of the 10-year period would be shillings 15 million after taxes. As the investment is in the area where the government wishes to develop a subsidized loan of 8 million, out of the total 18 million is available. This will cost 2% below the company's normal cost of long-term debt finance, which is 8%. So additional information, note number 1. The company's equity beta is 0.85. And it is financial gearing is what percent? 60% equity and 40% debt. Then note number 2, average equity beta in the tourism industry is 1.2, average gearing 50% equity and 50% debt. Note number 3, the risk-free rate is 5.5%. Note number 4, the market return is 12%. Note number 5, issue costs are estimated to be 1% of the debt financing, excluding the one with the subsidy, then 4% for equity financing. These costs are not tax allowable. So corporate tax rate is given as 30%. So now required adjusted net present value of the proposed investment project. So the first step, we compute the best case NPV. But before we go to the best case NPV, we need to calculate the cost of capital, which will be our discount rate to be given by this. Also, before then, we compute the beta factor of equity for unlevered farm because you want to get the best. So we are evaluating, you see in the first paragraph, they are considering an investment in which industry? The tourism industry. You can see that first paragraph. So when you go to the additional information, there is note number 1 and note number 2. Note 1, the company is equity beta. So equity beta is the beta factor of equity for the levered farm. That is what we discussed when we are doing the restructuring. Equity beta is the beta factor of equity for the levered farm. So the note number 1 is for the company. But here we are evaluating the tourism industry. So that means you ignore the note number 1. We use the note number 2. We apply the note number 2 where they say that average equity beta in the tourism industry, it is 1.2, and average gearing, it is 50% equity and also 50% what? Debt. So we are at this point. So beta factor of equity for the levered farm, we are calculating for the tourism industry in the note number 2. Average equity beta in the tourism industry. So equity beta is the beta factor of equity for the levered farm. Asset beta, if you are given the asset beta, remember that it is the beta factor of equity of unlevered. So you take 1.2. We take 1.2, we divide by 1 plus. So debt to equity ratio is the 50% and 50% in the note number 2. So it is 0.5, also divide by 0.5. Then 1 minus the tax rate like that. So get that figure. We shall also be required to round it off, maybe to 2 decimal places, just in case. So calculate that portion. When we compute, it is giving us which part? Sorry? It's 0 or 1, or I've seen something like 1.71. Online, it is which figure? Online, I've seen 1.71. So now I can see 0.71. So it should be 0.71. Yeah, I've seen 0.76, 0.706. So we can just use that value, 0.706 like that. You can just apply it in that manner. So once we have done that, we now calculate KEU. KEU is the cost of equity of the unlevered farm. So when you go to the note number 3, they have given you the risk-free rate, because KEU is the risk-free rate plus in brackets expected return for the market minus. So in the note number 3, risk-free rate is given as 5.5. Then we add expected return for the market in the note number 4. They have given you 12. You also minus 5.5. Then 0.706 like that. $10.0. So we can roughly use 10%. We can round it off to 10%. So that is now our discounting rate. That's now meant to be our discounting rate. So once we get that discounting rate, we are calculating the best case NPV. Our step number 1. We are computing the best case NPV. So to get that best case NPV as our step number 1, it is simply present value for the cash inflows minus the present value for the cash outflows. So the question had given us before tax. The question had given you before tax cash flows. When you go to the paragraph number 3, they said that the investment is expected to generate pre-tax net. So pre-tax is the same as before the tax. Pre-tax is the same as before the tax. So pre-tax net cash inflows of 14 million. So that is the same as earnings before the tax. Pre-tax is the same as the earnings before the tax. So the question has given you 14 millions. Then you less the tax on that value. We less the tax. So tax should be 30% of 14 millions. The tax should be 30% of 14 millions. So what should be 30% of 14 millions? 4.2. So when you subtract, we get the earnings after tax, which is 9.8 millions. So we are calculating the present value of the cash inflows. We are computing the present value of the cash inflows, which will be given by annuity multiplied by present value interest factor for the annuity. So the project was supposed to be there for how many years? The period in that note number, the paragraph number 3, 14 million per year for a period of 10 years. So cost of capital, we got 10%, our KEU, for 10 years. For 10 years like that. So this annuity is the 9.8 millions that you have calculated. Our annuity is the 9.8 million. So go to the second table. Go to the second table, check 10% in period 10. You check 10% in period 10. What is 10% in period 10? 6.1446. So you multiply that. But the question also had a scrap value or the salvage value. It had the scrap value or the salvage value. When you continue where we got the 10 years, they said that the residual value at the end of 10 years period will be how much after taxes? 15. So that is a salvage value. We also factor in the salvage value. So salvage value only occur once. We use the first table. We discount it at the present value interest factor, 10% in period 10. So salvage value is given as the residual value is the salvage value. The residual value is the salvage value. They were able to give you 15 million. So check in the first table. In the first table, 10% in period 10, because that only occurs once. Should be 0.3. Yeah, so when you add those two figures together, it will be able to give you present value for the cash inflows. It will be able to give you present value of the cash inflows. It will be able to give you present value of the cash inflows. Then we less present value for the cash outflows. So present value for the cash outflows was the cost of the project, which was given to you in the first paragraph as 48 millions. So present value for the, so after calculating those figures, you get that. So present value for the cash outflow is 48 million. So that you get the best case NPV. Best case NPV at that point. So that will be your step number one. That will be your step number one. That will be your step number one. 48 million is in the first paragraph. They have told you the cost of the project is 48 million. So that is your present value of the cash outflow. So that will be our step number one. That will be our step number one. There are normally 4 steps. So that is now the first step on how to compute the adjusted NPV. So what value are we getting at that point? You are getting which figure? 17 millions. 17 millions, 999,6 what? 658. So I'm seeing a figure of 17 millions point. It is 17.8, sorry, 17.9958. So it is 9 3 times, isn't it? Then 5 8 like that. So that should be your step number one. So there are 4 steps. Maybe we can write something on the step number 2. Now we go to the step number 2. We go to the step number 2. So step 2 is that. Step number 2 is that determine the present value of the issue cost. Step number 2 is that determine the present value of the issue costs or flotation costs. The step number 2 is that determine the present value of the issue cost or the flotation costs. The issue cost or flotation costs. So under that, we say that these are costs which are incurred. These are costs which are incurred when raising new capital. They are costs which are incurred when raising new capital, which are incurred when raising new capital. And therefore, they are normally incurred in period 0. And therefore, they are normally incurred in period 0. They are normally incurred in period 0. When the project is to be undertaken, they are normally incurred in period 0. When the project is to be undertaken, when the project is to be undertaken, hence, they are already in present value terms. Hence, they are already in the present value terms. Hence, they are already in the present value terms. Hence, they are already in the present value terms. They are already in the present value terms. So, the information on that was given to you in the note number 5. So let us see how to get them. In the note number 5, they said that issue costs are estimated to be 1% of the debt financing, excluding the one with the subsidy, and 4% for equity finance. So these costs are not tax allowable. So to calculate the issue cost as your step number 2, to calculate the issue cost in your step number 2. So issuing cost is supposed to be, so to get the issue costs, you want to get the present value of the issue cost. Present value of the issue costs. So we start with the one on the debts. we start on the one on the debts. We start by calculating the ones on the debts. We start by computing the ones on the debt. So that issuing cost on the debt, they have said is 1% in the note number 5. You can see the 1%, but they are saying that excluding the one with what? The subsidy. So go back to that paragraph number 3. Go back to the paragraph number 3, where they stated that the residual value was 15 million. So as the investment is in the area where the government wishes to develop a subsidized loan of how much? 8 million out of a total of how much? 18. So 8 million has a subsidy. So what is the balance that has no subsidy? 10 million. So it will be 1% on 10 million. 1% on 10 million. But all of you know, so 10 million, 10 million, all of you understand that this project requires 48 million. So flotation cost will not be subtracted from the 10 million. I hope you get that part. So that means that this 10 million is the same as 99%. If you minus 1% from this figure, the balance will not be enough for the project. The balance will not be enough for the project. So we assume that what is now in the bank that they have given you was 10 million. Net the processing fee. Flotation cost is the processing fee. That processing fee is what we refer to as the issue or the flotation cost. So what came to your account was 10 million. After they have subtracted 1%. So that means that this 10 million is the same as what? 99%. How about 1%? How about 1% to give us which value? So when you cross multiply, it is the same as 1% divided by 99%, then multiplied by 10 million like that. So we work it like that. So, but if you subtract 1% from the 10 million, the remaining balance will not be enough for the project. The remaining balance will not be enough for the project. So how much is that value? It is 100 and what? Online you are getting 101. 101. 010 like that. Go and look at 0.01 divided by 0.99. Multiply by the figure in full. If you want to be accurate in the exam, and look at those figures in full. Otherwise, you may get mixed up. They are saying it is 101, 010. It is 101, 010. So that is now on the debt. Also the one for equity. Also the one for equity. So equity in that note number 5, they said it is 4%. It is 4%. So when you go up there in the second paragraph, they said that 48 million project cost will be financed. So 10 million using internal funds. We don't charge flotation cost on the retained earnings, but they will charge the flotation cost on the 20 million. So equity is retained earnings and the ordinary share. So it will be on the right issue, which is meant to be 20 million. So 20 million is equivalent to 96%. How about the 4%? What value should be there? So for that, you will also be able to take the 4% divided by 96% multiplied by the 20 millions. We don't charge flotation cost on the retained earnings. We charge the flotation cost on the ordinary shares, the cost we incur when we are issuing the ordinary shares. So when you compute, that will be able to give us which figure? So that should be able to give us which figure? Sorry. 808 080 like that. So add them together. Someone else has given me 83333. It is 833. Three plus 3. Yeah, so now you can add them together to give you the total. So the remaining two steps, we shall go through them in our next class so that we finish off the question. So we can stop there for now. So when we meet, we shall do the remaining two steps, then we complete the question.